Yeah. And thank you so much for, agreeing to spend time, because I would say that, I have been wanting to ask these questions because I have felt this lack of women's representation in STEM career.
Mhm.
And even more than that, like normally women don't speak as much as men do. And in STEM, first of all, there are lesser women. And top of that, the women who are there in STEM wouldn't want to talk much or wouldn't want to, speak publicly.
Mhm.
So combination of all that, I have never found anyone to find answers to all those questions. So it's kind of like chicken and egg that
Yeah.
exactly right, that it's because there are lesser women, I don't have enough women to talk, and that will lead to having lesser women.
Mhm. Yeah, no, it's definitely it's a big problem, and I think that personally I'm a little frustrated by the pace at which improvement should be happening compared to like what is actually happening, and sometimes I think we actually are moving back a little bit. So I'm happy to talk about it.
I feel that way too. I feel that way not just about STEM, but a lot of other things. And so it is very difficult, it's very difficult to keep up the morale
Mhm.
and keep on pushing.
Yeah.
And because y- you are also, working for a cause and trying to get more women in STEM,
Mhm.
you might be able to relate to that feeling. It's like there are a few days when you feel like, why am I doing this? Is it ever
Yeah.
going to change anything?
That was me all last week.
And then, then you realize your responsibility that, oh, if I don't do it, who else would do it? Someone needs to do it, and that
Mhm.
someone is me.
Yeah.
So let's start with because you have such a wonderful uh, background.
Sure.
I want you to tell about your background.
Okay. Sure. So I was born in India and I moved to Kenya when I was quite young. So I don't actually remember my first couple years in India. My first memories are growing up in Kenya when I was about 3 on to I think about 7 years old. So when I was growing up in Kenya, both my parents are engineers by training. And my dad was working with a company where they would put up communication towers in rural villages. So on the weekends, we had this really unique experience. Where we would get to travel all over Kenya, which is like a very naturally beautiful country. So even though we lived in the city of Nairobi during the week, you get to explore all these like rural areas on the weekends. See my dad and his colleagues put up these towers that would help connect the villages to the rest of the world. And I would just kind of hang around and watch them, but also interact with all the kids in the villages, play soccer. I think that's a pretty universal game, whether you call it soccer or football. Have a good time. So those are kind of my first memories. And then we moved back to India in, let's see, I don't remember exactly when it was, but I think I was around 7. And I was there for most of elementary school. Um, Pretty uneventful, like normal life, going to school every day kind of thing. But the biggest difference to me was that I also got to spend a lot of time with my grandfather, who's also an engineer. And, my mom and dad were both working. So I would come home from school every day and kind of go around the city with my grandpa, and we would talk about like, if something's broken, like how do we fix it? Or if there was a drought, he would like talk to me about like desalination and like why that was an issue and how we could fix it. So it kind of instilled in me at a very early age, like here are the 3 most important people in my life: my mom, my dad, and my mom's a chemical engineer, by the way, I should have mentioned. And she had a heat exchanger startup that she was working on when I was young. So with the 3 of them, kind of gave me a very good example of how if you had a STEM training, you could use that to build a better community for those around you. So they never really, like, I would say, I feel like the stereotype is like, oh, this Indian family pushes you towards engineering. I don't think they did that. But I think just by seeing like happy, fulfilled people in their lives, like, why wouldn't you want to be like, your role models? So, and the final, I guess, big leap in my life was that I moved to the US with my parents when I was about almost 10, about 9.5 years old. We first moved to Philly, lived in Iowa, Connecticut, um, where am I? I'm forgetting already. Connecticut, New York, Illinois, Massachusetts. And my dad actually moved around a lot in the middle of those things. So we got to see a lot of the country, and it was fun. It was a good experience. I think, I attended more than 10 schools by the time I graduated with my degrees. And skipped grades, repeated grades, kind of all over the place, but it really taught me how to adapt to changing environments very quickly.
That's I I knew that about your background. And first of all, what a wonderful childhood to have.
I
I
think
mean,
so.
I mean,
Yeah.
go ahead.
Oh, I was just gonna say, like, sometimes when I was little, I would get frustrated. Like, not with my parents, but just in general, I would be like, oh no, like we have to move again. Like, I'm so sad. I'm leaving all my friends. I have to start over. And in a sense, like that was difficult and it was hard. And I don't want to say that it wasn't. But I think when you're older and you have the perspective, you see that it's such a unique way to grow up. Like, yes, I had to leave some friends behind, but I still keep in touch with a lot of those people, and I got to meet a lot more people because I moved so much. And it also, I think, taught me how to understand and be compassionate towards people who were very different from myself. And I think as an adult, it has made me a better person. So I'm very grateful for it now, even if at the time, maybe sometimes I complained about it.
I know, see the things like, being able to step out of your comfort zone, or things like being adaptive, all those things. A lot of adults have to learn those things really hard way.
Mhm.
And it is very, although these things were frustrating for you because you had to go through them at a really young age.
Mhm.
Sure, it's, something that's frustrating for adults. I'm sure it must be tough for children too.
Yeah.
And yet, because you did it at such a young age, now it's just easy for you. It's just
Yeah.
easy for you. And also, I have seen, people like you, people, who grew up in third culture, uh, who they are usually the ones who value people way more than people like me who grew up in one place. So they put in much more effort than
Mhm.
rest of the world into relationships and keeping in touch. Because I was just talking to another friend whom I kind of interviewed, and we were talking about, she was also talking about the same things, like that is her constant. Like,
Mhm.
because she did not grow up in one place, she doesn't have her friends in one place. Wherever she went, she has friends in every place. So it's a habit to keep in touch with people, build relationships, and nurture those relationships. And I
No, and
really,
especially valid during a pandemic, I think. My powers of long distance communication are finally coming into play.
yes, and rest of us have to learn it now.
Mhm.
So you are way ahead of the curve. So I'm going to go to the question that, I really, really have been dying to ask you is why are there not enough women in STEM?
That is such a big question. Um, but I think it's really important to ask because it can be very easy to respond to that kind of thing with, like, that's just the world. There's a million things. People, hate women being successful. Like, you can have a million different reasons. And I'm not sure if you can ever boil it down to one or two, but I think the way I think about this question is thinking about people like me. What were the factors that kept me in STEM? And what were the things that, if they hadn't existed, would have driven me away from my career? So the way I like to think about it is in a framework is to have a woman in the STEM career, you need to recruit, retain, and promote her. So recruit is the stuff that happens at a fairly young age, right? So it's like, are you showing them examples of women in science, showing them that they can be a scientist, showing them that that's something that they can aspire to? And that involves things like seeing my mom as a successful chemical engineer and somebody who knew a lot about science and math, but also seeing my dad and my grandfather valuing her as an expert in her field, and coming to her and asking her questions. Like if something was broken and they couldn't fix it, they thought, oh, let's go ask her. And so I saw kind of both aspects of that. So for me, I don't know that I saw, too many examples of women in science or men valuing women in science in pop culture or media, or even outside of the home. But I was very lucky that I saw it in the home. And so that was kind of, I think, the thing that recruited me. And so I think when we think about, well, I'll come back to how we can drive this into help other people. But the second part is the retention part. So retain is how do we keep people in programs, right? So these are things like I get to college and I'm a mechanical engineering major. I'm 16 years old and I'm shy and I'm surrounded by, classes of like 99 teenage boys and me. And it's uncomfortable and awkward and I hate it. So like, how do you make that person stay in class? And there's a few different ways that are appropriate for different people. I think for me, part of it was the science itself, and part of it was the community that I was able to find. So in terms of the science, I was lucky enough to get pulled into the field of biomedical engineering and had professors show me that I could design medical implants that could, help people lead healthier lives. And I was like, great, like now I have a purpose of, even if I'm learning some tensor calculus or something really dry in class, I'm working towards something bigger that I think will have an impact on the world. So that motivation keeps you going, keeps you coming to class every day. But it is very hard to do things alone. So I think the other part of that retention process for me were programs like, the Society of Women Engineers, or women's programs within the mechanical engineering department, or even male students in my major who were like, oh, she gets really good grades, asking me to be in their group, asking me to study with them, because they thought that I was somebody that would provide value to the team. So I would say those are kind of the things that kept me. And when you don't have those, when you don't have the motivation and the community, that's another place where you lose people. And the final place where you lose people and you don't have enough women in STEM is in promotion. And I think this is the part of my career I'm in right now, and probably will be for the rest of my career, which is that I have a PhD. I have the pinnacle degree that I'm supposed to have to do, medical device research, and that's what I say I want to do. So technically it should all be golden from here. But what you don't realize until you get to this stage of your career is that at this point, it's very political, right? So like your advancement, your promotion, any awards you win, places you're nominated to speak, every way that you build up your esteem and your, I guess, prestige as an expert in your field is by other people recognizing you as an expert in your field. And those people who are the ones nominating or inviting people to speak at events, they are all still predominantly men, right? Because they're the people who are already at the advanced stage of their career. And so I've been very lucky that I have a few, quite a few actually, male mentors who have gone out of their way to nominate me for things, or when they're too busy to speak at an event, put me up on the podium instead. And so that kind of promotion are the things keeping me in STEM right now and pushing me forward. But I have seen examples where I don't get that from certain mentors, and I've seen examples of friends who don't get that from any mentors. And they feel incredibly disheartened because they've gotten to this point in their career where they've done everything they can do. And now that external recognition isn't happening based on like conscious or unconscious bias. And it's really hard to proceed. And you'll see male peers who are similarly or less successful based on quantitative metrics seem to surpass you once you get to this promotion stage. And I think that's where you lose a lot of women. So very long-winded answer, but I think that that's the way I would think about it. We don't recruit women, we don't retain women, we don't promote women, and that's why there aren't enough women in STEM.
It was very, it was a very complete answer.
I'm glad.
Thank you for that. Thank you for that. And I could, you know, I could see different stages, and also you told it beautifully. Like, you know, like as a marketer, if I were to look at, you know, the example of how well the story or this example was told, it was just so beautiful. Like you had a framework, you had a story, you had a structure. I mean, everything that something needs to be, it had it. And so I am very interested in obviously, you know, you don't need to answer this right now, but this is something I'm personally interested in, which is the recruit stage that you talked about.
Yeah.
I want to know, one is, I obviously know through wisdom you are trying to make a difference in recruit stage, or I'm sure you must be making a difference in retain and promotion also. But if there is specifically anything that we can do through Empowered Women, let me know. And I would love to do that. And coming to in promotion stage, something that really stood out to me was you specifying, you know, the male colleagues are who are quantitatively who are not at par with you, you see them surpassing you.
Yeah.
Which is an important distinction to make, because many times when we say that that person is not even better than me, it is taken as we are speaking emotionally.
Yeah.
And you gave me a language. You gave me a language to define something. Thank you for that also. So I want to, you know, going back to me asking you, first of all, I asked you why there are so few women. The second question I would ask is, you know, there are so many careers for women. Like there's so many, you know, I'm sure there must be career. I don't know. I'm just asking, you know, it's a hypothetical. So many careers for women. Why should women be interested in STEM career? Does it make a difference if they're there or they're not?
Yeah, I think that's a great part. It's a fantastic question. And again, I would think about it from two different perspectives. I think it matters to all of us, like as a society in our world, but it also matters to individual women. So maybe people will care about only one aspect of this or both aspects of this, but I think there are two. So from the broader world perspective, I think we live in very challenging technical times in that our population is going to reach, I think, 10 billion by 2050, I want to say. Don't quote me on that number, but it's a lot. And that means, you know, more medicines, more food, more clean water, more energy, with the same amount of resources. And that should scare you a little bit, because it means that we need a lot of innovation to get to a point where all of these people can lead the kind of quality of life that we would hope to extend to every human being. So from a world perspective, I think that the rate of innovation it needs to speed up in order for us to match the demands of where we're going to be in a few decades, you know. And so far we've seen over, you know, the past few hundred years, our quality of life has improved tremendously because of science. Everything from, you know, vaccines to, you know, lights to, you know, heating that keeps us warm. I mean, there's so many things, communications technologies, obviously, things that have made our lives better. And that was with just men, and for the most part, just rich men working on it, right? Like these great scientists that invented all these things, but if we had had more people working on it, where would we be right now? And so I think from a world perspective, that's why we should just get more people to pursue STEM careers to begin with, because I want to be, in the place that we see in a lot of like cool sci-fi movies with stuff happening really easily and all of us being cured of everything. Like I would love that. And if we can accelerate our pace to getting there, we should try to do that. And then from an individual perspective, because I think it's important, of course, to care about your society, but it's also okay to care about yourself and what happens to you. STEM careers, I think, are just incredibly adaptable. When you get a STEM degree, yes, you are qualified to go and build things or solve problems with technical challenges. And even if the environment changes, you can adapt. There are plenty of engineers that were trained way before the dot-com boom that still have relevant STEM careers today because they have the skill set to like understand the basic scientific principles and adapt to new skill sets surrounding that. So from a sense of like keeping yourself employed and providing for yourself and your family, I think it's very versatile that way. And not just in STEM, right? Like if you go talk to a bunch of people in like banking, finance, like venture capital investment, they love people from STEM backgrounds or analytical backgrounds because they know that, you've been taught this very quantitative and logic driven way of thinking, and they want to bring that into their world. So, pursuing a career in STEM doesn't have to mean wearing a lab coat and pipetting. That's what I do, and I love it. But it doesn't have to be. So you can shape it however you want, and you can find a way to provide for yourself and make the world better while you're doing it.
And I am a total believer in, if we are able to break this industrial silos or, professional silos, if we are able to work with each other, understand each other, and if there is a gender mix, more diversity we have, the diversity that you had growing up in your life made you a better person than what you could have been. It works for the community, it works for the nation also. Like more people of different professional backgrounds work together in different places, there are different ways of thinking. Like you mentioned banking. If there are more people of available, first of all, banks would love to have them, but if there were more people available of STEM background to work in banking, it would just work better than what it is working right now. So
yeah, for sure. No, that's a great point. I think a lot of people have done studies to show that, more diverse groups create more innovative or creative ideas quickly. And that's another great aspect of that as well. When you add more women, it's not just like a linear increase, but I think you can have like a exponential increase in productivity and creativity.
Yeah, sounds like a lucrative and like nicely climbing up, kind of stable, nice career. I think stable right now is the key word.
Yeah.
And however, I would, let's talk about the emotional side of it. Emotional side, and it could get lonely though. Like, what you mentioned earlier in when we started talking about, being only woman in a class of 99 other boys. And I have been there. I went to engineering school for a month. I obviously had other reasons. I really didn't want to study engineering. That was another part of it. I really wanted to study architecture, and that's where I went. But other than that, like there was nothing which held me back, or, like friends you make or sense of belonging you start feeling, the excitement of learning something new, that I didn't have there. And to build any career, anything, it takes a village. And as I can see in STEM, it can get lonely. It can get emotionally exhausting. So how do you think someone should deal with it? And where do you bring that village from?
Yeah, and thank you so much for asking that question, because I think that the narrative sometimes, a lot of times, is like, oh, you're a strong person, you're an independent person, is that you don't need a support community. Like you can be the only one. Like I've watched in movies so many times where somebody just goes in and they do everything by themselves, even though everyone's against them, and then they come out on top, and then they're like, aha, I've done it. But that's not obviously what it feels like for anyone going through that process. Like, human beings are social creatures, and of course, if you walk in anywhere and you're the only person that looks like you, whether people treat you differently or not, you perceive them as seeing you as different. It makes you uncomfortable, and you can't be your best self. And it is incredibly lonely, especially when you are a teenage girl, which is when it happens to a lot of girls that are going into science. That's when they're making the transition into taking more technical classes, right? And like, that's when you're the most vulnerable in a lot of ways and the most self-conscious. So of course you got lonely, and thank you for acknowledging that you did. And it doesn't make you a weak person, it just makes you a normal person. And I think for me, in a weird way, my upbringing was a big reason why I didn't quit at that early stage, even when I didn't have a community, because that was not the first time I had been in a room where people didn't look like me, right? Like, when I was in Kenya, we would, go to all of these villages. None of those kids had ever seen anyone who wasn't Kenyan before. So they would like yank at my hair and like pull at it and be like, is this even hair? Like, it doesn't look right. And then when I moved back to India, people would like I had a very thick Kenyan accent because that's where I learned how to speak English. People would make fun of my accent all the time, being like, oh, like, are you from Africa? Like, do you live in a village? And then when I moved here, obviously, I spent all those years like working on an Indian accent to perfect it so people would finally stop making fun of my Kenyan accent. You can imagine, I can see you like laughing right now, that did not do me any favors in Iowa, right? So I was very used to being the only person of, either my skin color, my accent, my hair type, in an environment. And I knew that eventually people come around, for the most part. I mean, I don't try to seem all like hippy dippy and positive, but I genuinely believe that most people are good. And if you give them a chance to get used to something that they're kind of uncomfortable with at first, even if they're kind of mean to you at first, most people come around. Most people will say, that's a decent human being. I'm kind of familiar with them now and I'm okay with it. So I had had that experience so many times before that I was able to power through that moment. If I hadn't had that experience, I don't know that I would have. And so, because we can't expect every girl to be carted around continents in order to prepare her for a STEM career, you're right that you need to create that village. And I think the important part of the village is you diversity is key there too. The instinct, I think, for a lot of people is to go find other people exactly like them in the same situation and then be like, I'm freaking out. And they're like, I'm freaking out too. And like that can be helpful, but it's not entirely productive, right? Because generally when you're at your most low, the person who is most like you is also at their lowest point. So you're not really going to be able to help each other too much other than just providing kind of like pat on the back support. So why that diversity is important is you're, say, a freshman girl struggling in like a computer science class in college, right? So like, it's good to have other freshman girls. It's good to get to know some senior girls who have already taken that class and, found a passion through it, done an internship, and they're doing something else. It's good to have women at later stages in their career who are like, well, back in my day, it used to be like this, but like, I'm so glad I did it because I, love this career that I'm in. It's really important, again, like I mentioned, to have male allies and mentors. So people, men in your class who want to work with you, male professors who are encouraging you to move forward. And then I think the two things that people don't often think about are women in other fields. Like, it's not like we're only underrepresented in STEM, right? We're underrepresented in business and a lot of C-suite executive positions at companies. There are other places where the actual day-to-day work might be different, but the same challenges they're going through apply. So you can always expand your network that way. Even if you can't find another woman in a CS class, you can find somebody else that's still going through the same problem. And the last category, I think, is to expand your village to include girls who are younger than you, because I think even at a pretty early stage in your career, you're already a role model for a lot of people who haven't seen a freshman who's going to do computer science. So there might be a 7-year-old that thinks you're really awesome and amazing and brave. And I think it's important to remember that, because it makes you feel like, oh, I've already made it this far and I've already succeeded. So going forward is great, but you should also feel really good about where you are.
I am, you have the framework that you shared with me in the beginning of recruit,
Mhm.
retain, and promote. It has been like you embossed it on my head. And everything
Okay.
that you are saying, I am putting it in categories.
Mhm.
Like even when you explained like how to create a village for yourself and village for others, you
Mhm.
actually went through in different times, but you actually went through all those three stages.
Yeah, yeah.
And like, and while you were talking, I could relate it to myself. Like when I went to engineering school, I wasn't prepared with that adaptiveness. Then I went to architecture school. Fast forward, few years after graduating from architecture school, I was working at real estate funds where everyone other than me were men. And
Mhm.
at that point, I wasn't uncomfortable working with them, or I was feeling lonely. Like, because when I went to architecture school, I got to travel a lot. I got to meet with a lot of people. I got to talk to a lot of strangers. And I grew up as a person. So for me, it was created because of my studies. But maybe if there are parents listening to this, or if any parents ever listen to this conversation, they should try to create it for their girls. They
Mhm.
should try to create that diversity for their girls, is what I would say. Something, they don't need to, forcibly travel to different countries, but we are connected now.
Mhm.
They should intentionally introduce and expose women to girls to different cultures, different foods, different music, different art, everything that they could, and create that adaptability, build in that adaptability that will prepare them for STEM career.
Mhm. Yeah, I think that's a great point. I remember one time I, was talking about similar things to somebody, and he was like, "Oh, you should start a society called like hardships for young children or something," because he thought that I was saying that like children should have like a tough life like I did, and that's how they'll become strong and adaptable. But I like the way that you're thinking about it more. I think in the sense of sort of targeted discomfort, maybe low dose discomfort, something where you realize that your life and way of being is not the only way. I think that can be very helpful for a lot of young minds.
Yeah, and then they won't even, imagine a generation that won't even consider this as stepping outside their comfort zone.
Mhm.
That is
Yeah,
their comfort zone.
yeah,
That will be their comfort zone. Hey, uh, how do you do, like, I want to know about more about wisdom.
mhm.
Like, how, obviously I know what you do at Wisdom and why. uh, can you, obviously I know it, the other people who would be listening to it wouldn't know about it, so tell them about what is Wisdom and why and how you do it.
Sure. So, I mean, coming back to the framework, since that seems to be an effective storytelling tool, I would say that wisdom for me, the way I think about it, actually falls within the promote bubble. So, wisdom stands for the Innovation in STEM database at MIT. Um, I forgot women.
Women.
Wow. Wisdom stands for the Women in Innovation and STEM database at MIT. And it is exactly what it sounds like. It's a searchable, curated database of women at MIT who have or are pursuing STEM graduate degrees. So these are usually late stage graduate students, postdocs, technicians, people that are, experts already in their field, but still at a very early stage of their career. And each person essentially has a profile. They got their background, their picture, their technical areas of expertise. So that could be things like, I know, biomaterials and microfluidics and precision diagnostics for cancer. And it also includes their, outside of technical skills. So this could be like, I know I'm very knowledgeable about patent law or science policy or how government funding of science happens. And all this entire database is very searchable, and everyone who's listed in it has a active affiliation with MIT. That's what makes them eligible to join. And the point of the database initially was essentially just sort of like a place to find speakers for events, because I was sick of going to events and only seeing men on panels or speakers. And there are a lot of other databases that do this at a national and even international level, but I felt like there was value in having something that was vetted by MIT and local to the Boston ecosystem. So that was the initial goal. Like, if you're going to tell me, oh, I had this microfluidic symposium of postdocs, but I didn't know any women, I'm like, okay, fine. Like, just search wisdom and you can find like 15, and you can pick whichever one is most, valuable for your things. And so the whole point is, I'm not trying to make anybody satisfy a quota. I'm giving them a way to improve the quality of their event by inviting experts in the field to provide their unique perspectives. So initially it started off as a speaker database at MIT. It was acquired recently by MIT's Innovation Initiative. So it's run by MIT as an institution right now. It's got a great team working on it, making the website a lot snazzier. But they've also developed it as more than a speaker database. So it's a way for people to find co-founders for companies, if they're looking for expert consultants for their startups, if they're looking for people to sit on advisory boards for companies or startups. This is the next generation of women in STEM in the Boston ecosystem and beyond. So that's kind of the goal of Wisdom, where it's at right now. Our big goal right now is to expand membership within MIT and get more people using it actively. So that's kind of where I hope you and other people listening come in. Wisdom essentially has two users, right? Like, there's the people who sign up to be on it, and then there's the people who search it for women, for female experts in STEM. And so that user type 2 is also very important, because every time you're hosting a podcast or thinking about having a panel or starting a seminar series, I would encourage you and other people who are listening to search Wisdom and find out somebody who's local. Whether you see them in person or not, you'll know that they're local. You'll know that they're vetted by MIT. You'll have samples of links or websites that talk about their work and samples of them talking online, and you'll be able to find somebody great.
Thank you. And first of all, thank you for founding Wisdom. You nicely forgot to tell everyone that it's your baby.
Oh, yes.
And it has been, it has like last 1 or 2 years, even before I started Empower Women, I have been trying to encourage my men friends and colleagues and anyone actually that I know. And even when I see like over enthusiastic person, if I see a panel where there are, even if I don't know those people, and if I see their panel being advertised or marketed, and if I see all men on that panel, I write a message to them. I write a message to them and I tell them that they should have women, and these are the sources that they can find women speakers at. And I have nothing to do with their those sources, and I have nothing to do with those panels, but I know that that is what makes a difference. Like, it's a very big part of Recruit, because if they see more women in those careers, then the girls are going to go after those careers. If they can see it, they can do it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think that it's such a great idea to talk to people who are organizing events when you do see something like that, not with the intention of like calling somebody out or being like, you're terrible or I'm canceling you, but just being like, hey, you probably didn't even think about this, because for a lot of us, and this is not just true of men, by the way, I should mention that unconscious bias against women exists pretty uniformly in men and women. So a lot of us, even women, when we think about who is an expert in the field, will name a man. And so I think it's really just like a kind thing to do. If you feel comfortable, you can reach out and be like, hey, like, I think it would be really nice. I don't know, maybe you tried to get some women and they weren't available. But it would be really great if we could have, you know, a broader diversity of identities represented on the panel. And most of the time, I think people are really open to it. And it's either they did ask a bunch of women and they just couldn't make it, and sometimes that happens, or it's like they were like, oh my gosh, I just thought of the first 5 people, and now I know that I have this sort of, you know, unconscious bias in my head. I can fix it this time, and I can also, they're more likely, I think, to remember it the next time they schedule an event. So that's a really big part of wisdom too, is it relies again on sort of the inherent goodness of people and their want to be fair. People use it because they're interested in increasing the representation of women and because they're interested in highlighting and promoting women in STEM. So it only works if people want it to work, and I think most people do.
Yeah. And you know, I would also say that part of responsibility is also on women, which is that brings me to working on your leadership brand or personal brand. And I have seen this. I have a lot of scientist and engineer friends, obviously, because you know, being in Boston and being Indian, that
Yeah,
is, you know, you,
it's unavoidable.
yeah. And all of them, I don't know many of them who, you know, maybe few of them who have become startup founders, maybe those, they work on their personal brand or leadership brand, but they cringe at the word of personal branding. Or, and I see you doing a really good, you know, because you are doing so many things and you are involved in so many things, so it would be extremely difficult for someone to understand what is it exactly that you do.
Yeah.
However, when I see your online persona, your online presence, I get it. I get it. So that's why I think you're doing such a great job at it. So my questions, obviously there was a compliment there, if you
Thank you.
did notice it, which is, you know, great work. And another thing is, the question is, you know, one is why that cringing at personal branding or leadership branding, and two is what can change it, because wisdom is, or you know, asking other people to get women on panel and speaking engagements is one part of it, and 50% lies on women to show that they exist and show that they are the experts.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is, you know, it's such a touchy topic for so many people. And I think cringe is the perfect way to explain it. Like, anytime, you know, I think there was a wave of times when people were like, oh my gosh, like, people should have brands, maybe like 5 or 10 years ago, like that started being a new thought. And then immediately there's this like big backlash and like cringe response where you're like, oh my gosh, that's so tacky. That's too much. Like, there's too much self promotion. I don't want to deal with it. And I think that that's so unfortunate, because the reason we need personal branding is because we don't live in a perfect ideal world that is tailored to us, right? So like, one, unconscious bias exists. So unless you tell people like, hi, I'm here, I won an award, here's my new paper, look how great everything is, I love science, have I mentioned, you keep reminding them, then they'll remember, right? Like, you, if they're not going to go out of their way to be like, who's an up and coming like young woman in STEM, like working on biomaterials research, like, you do the work to put yourself out there, say what you've done, document your successes, and don't rely on other people to go diving through, you know, 10 Google search pages trying to figure out like why you are worthy. No one is going to advocate for you that much, right? Like, your mom might, and my mom would, and so would my dad, but like the average person on the street is not going to put that much effort into me. And I get it, because they have their own life and they're putting that effort into themselves. And so I think that's the reason why I would say that you need personal branding. It's not this horrible thing where you're trying to bring down other people. In fact, it's a thing where you're trying to, bring yourself up, you're trying to hustle, but you're doing it by making it easier for other people to know who you are, what you're interested in, what you've accomplished, and where you're going. And I think that that's, a good thing. A lot of things that you learn, I think, as a woman, as an immigrant, as a person of color, is that you have to work really hard, right, to get where you are. And people aren't going to go out of their way to do you favors. So what's wrong with looking out for yourself? I think you should do that.
Yeah, yeah, perfectly said. And I would, I would even say that people had simpler careers. Like people, when they did not, if you are saying that, oh, XYZ, who is so very successful, never had to promote themselves or never had to do any work on their leadership branding. Maybe they were just, like simpler career, like lawyer or a doctor, which is there not much to explain. But a lot of us, many of us have complicated careers, newer careers, and so many sides to them, like
Mhm.
yours.
Yeah. No, I think that's a great point, and I forgot to mention that, and I think it's really, I'm glad you brought it up. You'll see, I think I've gotten a lot of pushback. I think some of the cringe that you get with personal branding is because women who do it are often getting pushback from male peers for doing it. I have actively had people either to my face or like kind of behind my back, but like a wall away so I can still hear them, make fun of my website or videos that I post, or being like, oh, like here's like, Ritu, she's the master of like making herself seem great. I mean, people say this stuff all the time. And their whole thing, right? These men that say all this stuff is like, I feel that if I'm good and I work hard and I'm successful, then I will automatically be recognized and be successful. And I'm like, and maybe that is true for you, right? Because that was true for a lot of men for a lot of times, because there were fewer people in the field, like you were saying, there were more linear trajectories, but also men were more willing and comfortable recognizing other men as experts in their fields. And so they were nominating the people who were worthy. I'm not saying the people who won the awards didn't deserve them. I'm just saying it's harder to find those people right now, just because there's so many of us and we have so many different paths. And sometimes we look very different from the people nominating the awards. So yeah, we have to do a little bit of the extra work to get the recognition. But yeah, I mean, it's tough. It's tough to hear that kind of pushback, and it certainly disheartens me sometimes, and I've certainly spent hours crying about it at different points in my life. But at the end of the day, like, I'm just trying to have a successful career and provide for myself and provide for my family. And if anyone's going to go out of their way to make fun of me for that, I think that's more of a them problem and not a me problem.
Thank you for sharing that. And the this is one word I avoid saying, but vulnerability. Yeah. Thank you for saying that how it has affected you in the past and how you
Mhm.
have gotten over it. And I also know, I know that it comes in waves. Sometimes you feel bad about what someone is saying, and sometimes you don't.
Yeah.
Most of the time, you try not to feel bad about it, and it's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
It is a lot of hard work to in creating leadership branding is not even about promoting yourself. It's just about telling people that you exist and this is who you are.
Mhm.
And and you do a great job at it. I really enjoy following you everywhere that I do and reading about things. And although I am having this long conversation with you only for the second time, I feel like I know you really well.
Yeah, I think that's a great part about social media, and I should have mentioned it in the building a village role, is that because of social media and how much we can form a connection with people, even when we don't speak to them in person all the time, you can build that village fairly easily now, right? Like, even if you are the only woman in your class or in your college, even, you can go online and find other people who are majoring. There's, I don't know how many billion people there are on Earth right now. Like, what is it, like seven, over seven? There's one other person that matches your experience, and they're probably on Twitter or Instagram or something. So you can always find them and build community that way. And I'm glad that you know, you and others like you vastly outnumber any kind of naysayers on these platforms, and I think it's been an overall very positive experience.
I uh, that is a great piece of advice. And with that, I think, I was only aiming for 30 minutes of conversation, and we have already talked for like 50 minutes.
Uh-oh, my
I
bad.
absolutely enjoyed talking to you. And I think part of it comes from following you on LinkedIn and Instagram
Mhm.
and feeling like I was talking to a friend and I wasn't talking to a stranger, and already knowing you gave me the right questions to ask, I would say.
Yeah, I'm glad. I was gonna say like this, I feel like I've done a lot of podcasts and um like this is one of the ones that have felt the most conversational, like we were just having tea and I didn't feel like I had to prepare or anything. It's surprising to me that we've only met once in person before. So hopefully after the pandemic we can meet again.
Yes, we should. We should. We should. I would really like to be friends with you and, share things with you. And in spite of having completely different professional background, I could relate to so many of your stories. I
Mhm.
could relate to so many of your experiences, stories, and there was so much learning into all of it. And I feel like I'm much smarter than I was an hour back.
I'm glad. Thank you for making me feel smart. I really appreciate that.
Thank you for your time, Ritu. And before I let you go, I want to give you. I want to invite you for something, which is we are planning to have Empowered Women Live.
Mhm.
So instead of just you and me talking, we will have people who could join us and comment live. And I am thinking that, if I'm able to do it I'm planning to do one every first Wednesday of the month.
Mhm.
So one of the Wednesdays, if I could get you, and I have good relationship with Thai, which is Thai Young Entrepreneurs,
Mhm.
and if I could get high school girls to listen to you, it's my dream. So
Well,
if
I love talking to them, so that's my dream. That sounds like a great idea. I would love to participate. I think, you know, people always talk about like outreach activities or something as like a chore or like a service activity that you do, but whenever you talk, you know, I have, you know, mentoring calls with a high school girl pretty much every week this summer. That's like the best conversation I have, you know, because like one, it makes me feel smart because I know the answers to her questions. But two, it's just like they're so energetic and young and it makes you hopeful for the future. And, you know, this sounds like a great initiative and I'd love to participate.
yeah, and it would be let's see, I will send you dates of
Mhm.
every first Wednesday for next 12 months.
Okay.
Whichever Wednesday you are free, we
Okay.
can talk, and I will then, see, because I would love for you to talk to many high school students, so that they can see what's
Mhm.
being in STEM looks like.
Yeah.
And just if they can see it, they will be able to, and you're very inspiring, and I'm sure, if they see you, they would want to do it.
I'm glad. All right. I will do my best.
Yeah. So that's it. Thanks again for being here, and I hope to take care, and I hope to talk to you really soon.
Yeah, me too. Awesome. Stay safe.
You too.